A cordial greeting. Today is Saturday, June 3, 2023. This is meteorologist Ruben Garcia speaking. In today's video, I would like to talk about the hurricane forecast for this season in the Atlantic Ocean Basin. Remember that the hurricane season officially began last Thursday, June 1, 2023. So, in this video, I will take a few minutes to discuss the different forecasts from various agencies and experts in tropical meteorology. I will emphasize the effects that the El Niño phenomenon and the warm waters currently present in the Atlantic region will have. As I have shared with you over the past few months, the forecasts for this hurricane season are quite complex, and there is currently a lot of uncertainty regarding how active this Atlantic hurricane season could be. Before continuing, I wanted to mention that we currently have Tropical Storm Arlene located in the waters of the Gulf of Mexico, approaching the region of Cuba. However, our followers in Cuba can rest assured because it is expected that this cyclone will dissipate in the next few hours due to dry air and shear winds affecting its circulation from the southwest. Officially, this cyclone is the second tropical storm of the season. Although it carries the name Arlene, a subtropical storm formed in the North Atlantic in January. However, it was not named by the National Hurricane Center. Later, in a subsequent analysis in May, it was indicated that this would be the first subtropical storm of the season, but it did not carry a name. That is why Tropical Storm Arlene, which is the second storm of the season, has been named using the first name on the official list for this year. So officially, we have already had two storms formed in this 2023 hurricane season. Let's now move on to see the next animation, which shows anomalies in sea surface temperatures. Remember that this is the main factor we analyzed before and during the hurricane season, as it gives us an idea of how much cyclonic activity we can anticipate this year, both in the Atlantic and Pacific regions. There are three very important things we need to discuss in this animation. Firstly, the waters in the Pacific East region, near the equator, continue to warm. This is an indication that the El Niño phenomenon is around the corner, and it is possible that we will officially have the development of El Niño in the Pacific region next month or before August. Remember that historically, the El Niño phenomenon suppresses cyclonic activity in the Atlantic Ocean Basin, as it causes strong shear winds that extend from the western Pacific and cross over the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean region. However, on the other hand, we have two factors that would favor greater cyclonic activity. Firstly, the waters in the Atlantic are extremely warm, almost at record levels for this time of year. As you know, these warm temperatures usually promote cyclonic activity by providing more energy for the formation and strengthening of cyclones. Secondly, and no less important, we have an area with considerably cold sea surface temperatures for this time of year. This area is located west of Baja California and east of the Hawaiian Islands, and it can also have an effect on the activity of the hurricane season in the Atlantic. In this video and over the next few minutes, we will discuss how the effects of the El Niño phenomenon could be counteracted by the warm waters of the Atlantic and by this area of cold waters that we have in the Pacific. In theory, we are saying that we have two very important conditions that will both counteract the effects in the Atlantic, and that's why this year's forecast is quite uncertain. It is worth mentioning that it is unusual to have the El Niño phenomenon in the Pacific and such warm temperatures in the Atlantic, as most of the time, the waters in the Atlantic tend to cool down when El Niño develops. We have a rather atypical year, and we are eager to see what happens in the coming months. In fact, I wanted to mention that in the Niño 3.4 region, we are almost reaching values that are typical of the El Niño phenomenon. However, we need to have a 3-month average where the temperatures are 0.5 degrees Celsius above normal. But as you can see, since the beginning of June, we have already exceeded this threshold. I believe that by the end of June or in the month of July, it will be officially declared that we have the El Niño phenomenon in the Pacific. Therefore, the chances of El Niño developing at the moment are almost 100%. I think the best way we can explain how these different factors are competing during the hurricane season is by analyzing the behavior of atmospheric circulation when we have the El Niño phenomenon in the Pacific. In this image, we can see the general behavior of atmospheric circulation in the tropical region under El Niño conditions. I want you to observe the orange color, which represents warmer temperatures than usual over the equatorial region, which is precisely what we have at the moment. Also, note that typically, the Atlantic region, under El Niño conditions, tends to have temperatures near or slightly below normal. Another very important point is that the region west of Baja California usually experiences warmer temperatures than usual during El Niño events. This is a significant factor that is different this year. Returning to the image of typical atmospheric circulation during El Niño events, observe that the warm waters near the equator usually contribute to greater instability in the Pacific region. They also enhance atmospheric convection, resulting in more favorable conditions for the formation of systems in the eastern Pacific. Additionally, the formation of these thunderstorms over the equator during El Niño events tends to generate upper-level shear winds moving over the Caribbean region. It also increases the speed of the trade winds over the Atlantic and the Caribbean. Therefore, under typical El Niño conditions, this pattern causes stronger trade winds from the east near the surface in the Caribbean and winds from the west at higher levels of the atmosphere. These conditions result in shear winds that often affect any system or cyclone moving through this area. However, during this year, we have to take into consideration that we have factors that may be weakening this typical circulation during El Niño conditions. Going back to the image of temperature anomalies, the warm Atlantic and the area with cooler waters in the Pacific can weaken the typical circulation during El Niño conditions. When we have warmer temperatures in the Atlantic, that can favor the formation of some thunderstorms along the tropical Atlantic and counteract the effect of stable and dry air in the Atlantic region. Additionally, the cold waters located west of Baja California also have a counteracting effect on the instability typically seen in the Pacific region. What I mean to say is that if these conditions persist during the peak of the season, it is possible that the typical circulation we observe during El Niño conditions will be affected, and it could limit the adverse conditions that usually suppress cyclonic activity in the Atlantic. I also wanted to mention that typically we have a current of water that moves near the Canary Islands and towards the tropical Atlantic, and the waters in this area are usually quite cold, injecting dry and stable air into the tropical region. However, as you can see, during the months of May and June, the temperatures in this area remain above normal. Therefore, this may also favor the descending air from this area to the tropical Atlantic to be less dry and unstable, and this can also have the effect of promoting at least the formation of some cyclones between the Caribbean and Africa. But be cautious, as we should not underestimate the effects of El Niño on the hurricane season and the formation of this circulation. El Niño will continue to have a primary effect and is expected to suppress cyclonic activity. When we analyze all this, the most logical conclusion is that possibly this year's hurricane season will be close to normal. However, any variation in the patterns we have discussed can cause the hurricane season to be less active or even potentially more active than usual. But logically speaking, this season should be close to normal. Let's continue discussing the different forecasts from various groups and meteorological agencies. It is not surprising to see a considerable variation in forecasts this year. However, when we analyze the average of different forecasts from various groups, the consensus is that the hurricane season should be close to normal. Nonetheless, we have some models like the European model and the UK Met Office forecasting a much more active hurricane season than usual. However, the majority of groups are forecasting a hurricane season with activity close to normal, including NOAA and the University of Colorado, whose forecasts are known to be quite accurate. We also have some groups forecasting that the hurricane season could even be less active than normal. I repeat, we see a lot of variability in these forecasts, but on average, they agree that the season should be close to normal. Let's now analyze the latest forecasts that have been issued, particularly taking into consideration that we have passed the spring barrier where it is difficult to forecast the El Niño or La Niña phenomenon, and we are almost certain that it will develop in the coming months. Let's start with the forecast from NOAA, which was published at the end of May. You can see that it states a 40% chance of having a hurricane season close to normal, but they maintain a 30% chance of it being more active or less active than usual. This gives us an idea of the uncertainty we have and how these factors may be competing with each other. However, once again, in general, the most obvious assumption is that it will be a season close to normal. In fact, NOAA is forecasting between 12 to 17 storms, 5 to 9 hurricanes, and 1 to 4 major hurricanes, category 3, 4, or 5. I must mention that this range is quite broad for this type of forecast. This leaves us the possibility of having a less active season if certain factors occur. However, it could also happen that the season surprises us and we see more activity than normal. The next forecast we will analyze is the forecast from the University of Colorado, which was published last Thursday. In fact, the University of Colorado slightly increased the cyclonic activity forecast compared to the forecast they issued in April. At the moment, they are forecasting the formation of 15 tropical storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes. When we compare these numbers with the average of the last 30 years, you can see that in general, the University of Colorado is forecasting a hurricane season close to normal. In their analysis, they mention some of the factors we have discussed in the last few minutes. But primarily, they say that years with warmer temperatures than usual throughout the tropical Atlantic, the Caribbean, and the region near the Canary Islands historically have seasons with more activity than usual in the Atlantic region. When we compare this picture with the current conditions, we can see a significant similarity with colder than usual waters in the northwest Atlantic and warmer than usual temperatures in the tropical and subtropical Atlantic. This is an almost perfect comparison. And if we only analyze this picture, anyone could say that this season would be more active than usual. But once again, I repeat, the El Niño phenomenon and its effects will be significant and should counteract this effect. Furthermore, in their analysis, the University of Colorado examines analog years, meaning years that have had similar conditions to what we currently have. With this analysis, they found that the years most similar to 2023 are 1951, 1957, 1969, 2004, and 2006. In these years, on average, we had the El Niño phenomenon in the Pacific, colder than usual temperatures west of Baja California, and a warmer than usual Atlantic with colder temperatures in the northern Atlantic. When we look at the cyclonic activity during these hurricane seasons, the University of Colorado shows us that there is quite a variation among these seasons. For example, the 1957 season only had 8 tropical storms, 3 hurricanes, and 2 major hurricanes. However, we have other hurricane seasons, such as 1951 and 1969, that had significantly higher cyclonic activity with many hurricanes, and many of them reached major hurricane status. But when we average these numbers from the 5 hurricane seasons, they give us values that are typical of a hurricane season close to normal. However, you can see that this also gives us an idea of the uncertainty during this year, where we could easily have a highly active hurricane season like the one we saw in 1969. But it could also result in a less active hurricane season like the one in 1957, where there were only 8 tropical storms. Next, let's continue with the forecast from the Tropical Storm Risk Group, which also has a good track record of accuracy in these forecasts. For 2023, they are forecasting 13 tropical storms, 6 hurricanes, and 2 intense hurricanes. In general, they are predicting a season close to normal or slightly less active than usual. Another group that recently issued their forecast was the Met Office in the United Kingdom, and they predict that the hurricane season should be hyperactive with 20 tropical storms, 11 hurricanes, and 5 major hurricanes. In fact, this forecast was very surprising to most meteorologists. When we compare it on this graph, you can see that the UK office, along with the European model, are the most aggressive forecasts we have at the moment. In general, the UK office mentions that warm temperatures in the Atlantic and possibly the delayed development of El Niño could create conditions for a highly active hurricane season. Personally, I think this forecast is too aggressive. However, it is still possible, although the probability at the moment is minimal due to the rapid approach of El Niño. Let's also look at the ensemble of North American models. In general, for the peak of the season, they continue to forecast that the Atlantic will remain quite warm, with moderate to strong El Niño development in the Pacific, and cool waters between Hawaii and Baja California. The precipitation anomaly forecast for the Atlantic during the peak of the hurricane season suggests that we could have some cyclonic activity, but it would be concentrated in the region between the Caribbean and Africa, as well as the subtropical region or north of the Caribbean. However, in yellow, you can see how this model suppresses rainfall activity in the Caribbean region, which could be associated with the anticipated wind shear due to El Niño. Let's say that this model probably suggests a hurricane season close to normal, with activity likely focusing in this area. We also have the forecast from CONSIPS, which shows something very similar to the ensemble of North American models. In general, it has a forecast for the peak of the season that closely resembles what we see in the North American models, but slightly stronger anomalies of above-average precipitation are expected between the Caribbean and Africa, and slightly farther south. This could put some Caribbean islands, including the Bahamas, Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, and the islands north of the Lesser Antilles at risk. However, in the Caribbean, it also shows drier conditions than usual during August, September, and October, which could again be related to the wind shear in this area and the stronger than usual trade winds that tend to occur due to El Niño. Another model is the CFS, which has a very similar forecast. However, it slightly warms the waters between Hawaii and Baja California. But in its precipitation anomaly forecast during the peak of the season, it closely resembles the CONSIPS model and the North American models. In general, you can see that these models agree that we may have a hurricane season close to normal, and most of these cyclones should be forming in the tropical Atlantic and just north of the Caribbean region. However, it is possible that the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Sea may see less activity than usual due to significant wind shear. It is important to mention that this does not mean that a cyclone will not form in this area, it simply means that the cyclonic activity is likely to be concentrated elsewhere. Finally, let's analyze the forecast from the European model, which also agrees with the other models. A very warm Atlantic, El Niño developing in the Pacific, cold temperatures between Hawaii and Baja California. For these reasons, this model predicts that the hurricane season may be more active than usual. However, you can see that it also concentrates most of the rainfall in the zone between the Caribbean and Africa, as well as the subtropical Atlantic, and maintains below average precipitation anomalies throughout the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico. Nevertheless, as we saw in this graph, the European model does forecast that this hurricane season can be quite active for the Atlantic. It predicts 17 storms when the normal number is 14, and it also forecasts 9 hurricanes when the normal number is 7, coming closer to the forecast from the UK office. Well, these are all the forecasts that I wanted to share with you. In summary, the main idea I want you to take away is that the El Niño phenomenon is imminent in the Pacific, and historically, this causes strong wind shear over the Caribbean and the Atlantic, suppressing cyclonic activity. However, we have 2 factors that could counteract these effects. The first and most important one is the warm waters in the Atlantic, and the second one we need to keep an eye on is whether these cold temperatures between Hawaii and Baja California persist. In my opinion, I agree very well with the forecasts from NOAA and the University of Colorado, where the most obvious prediction is that this season should be close to normal. However, we should be aware that there could be variations that could make it more or less active. Therefore, like every year, all we can do is wait and be prepared to face any cyclone that approaches the region where we live. And it is very important to remember that a single hurricane can cause devastation in the area where you live, so please prepare for the season as we do every year and rely on hurricane info to stay informed. If you like my content, please subscribe to my channel. Go to the red button below the video on YouTube that says subscribe, click on it, and then click on the bell icon to receive notifications when I upload new videos. Thank you very much, as always, for the support you have given me over the past decade. I will be here again to keep you informed and provide you with the most accurate information and my opinions about these cyclones. I hope you all have an excellent summer. Until next time.